Hello and welcome to our podcast from Assisi. My name is Solanus Mary. Being based here in the Sacro Convento in Assisi, I am privileged to be able to give guided tours of the Basilica to the pilgrims. A question I get asked many times is, why do the frescoes depict St. Francis with holes in his hands? It takes a while to fully explain the stigmata, the aforesaid holes in his hands, and this will be the topic of today's podcast. Let me first begin by saying that St. Francis of Assisi has been the subject of many biographies in the English language. My own personal favourite is the one written by the English writer and convert G.K. Chesterton. The book is still widely available and everyone should have a copy in his library. Some years back, when I was assigned to England, I had the good fortune to visit Beaconsfield in Buckinghamshire. In St. Teresa's Church in Beaconsfield, which happened to be Chesterton's parish church, there can be seen a beautiful stained glass window in memory of Chesterton. The image on the stained glass portrays St. Francis receiving the stigmata. Chesterton indeed had a great devotion to the stigmata. For me personally, the image of St. Francis receiving the stigmata has always been the truest image of him. One of the earliest biographies of St. Francis was written by St. Bonaventure. Let's take a look at his account of the stigmata of St. Francis. About 2 years before his death and 20 years into his religious life, around the year 1224, Francis sought out a place of solitude on Mount Laverne, a high mountain of the Apennines, in the Italian region of Tuscany. He wished to be alone so he could make the 40-day fast in honour of St. Michael the Archangel. Francis had a great love for the Gospels. The Franciscan charism is, after all, to live the Holy Gospel. At Laverne, Francis asked a friar companion to open the book of the Gospels 3 times, because Francis knew that by doing so, God's will would be revealed to him. The Gospels were opened 3 times, and each time it opened at the Passion. Bonaventure goes on to tell us that Francis understood that he must become like Christ in the distress and agony of his passion before he left the world, just as he had been like him in all that he did during his life. Bonaventure continues, Then one morning about the feast of the exaltation of the cross, whilst he was passing on the mountainside, Francis saw a seraph with 6 fiery wings coming down from the highest point in the heavens. The vision descended swiftly and came to rest in the air near him. Then he saw the image of a man crucified in the midst of the wings, with his hands and feet stretched out and nailed to a cross. 2 of the wings were raised above his head, and 2 were stretched out in flight, whilst the remaining 2 shielded his body. Traditionally, there are held to be 9 choirs of angels in heaven. The choir that is nearest to the throne of God is the seraphim. The seraph in the vision is an angel of this choir. The vision's image of a man in the midst of the wings is clearly that of our blessed Lord crucified. Francis realized by divine inspiration that he was given this vision so that he would see that, as Christ's lover, he would resemble Christ crucified perfectly, not by physical martyrdom, but by the fervour of his spirit. Or, as Chesterton puts it, he would become a mirror of Christ. The vision disappeared. Interiorly, Francis's heart was inflamed with eagerness. Exteriorly, the mark of the nails began to appear on his hands and feet, just as he had seen them in the vision of the man nailed to the cross. Not only were the marks of our Lord's wounds imprinted on Francis's hands and feet, but the form of nails pierced through each mark as well. The right side of his body seemed as though it had been pierced with a lance. When Francis had completed his 40-day retreat, he came down from the mountain. He did his best to conceal the sacred stigmata. Nevertheless, God was to work publicly a number of miracles by way of this holy imprint. Bonaventure tells us about several miracles pertaining to Francis's stigmata. One of them takes place in the province of E.8, in the central part of Italy, and concerns a fatal disease that was killing a great number of cattle and sheep. There was nothing anyone could do. Then one night a devout man had a vision in which he was instructed to go to the hermitage where Francis was staying. He was to fetch the water with which Francis had washed his hands and feet, and then sprinkle this water over the livestock. The man went to the saint's hermitage as instructed. With the help of some friars, he managed to obtain secretly some of the water. He later sprinkled this water on the sick livestock, and at once they rose up from the ground and hurried off to pasture, as if they had never been sick. The water also banished the disease for good. For the remainder of his life, Francis was careful to hide his 5 wounds from the rest of the world. However, despite his best efforts, he could not prevent everyone from seeing them. 2 years after receiving the stigmata, Francis died. His remains were laid out, but his 5 wounds remained visible. Many people came from far and wide to venerate the wounds as he lay in state. Interestingly, Bonaventure tells us that later on Pope Gregory IX was troubled with a doubt about Francis' wound in the side. Then one night Francis appeared to him in a dream and rebuked him for his doubts. Francis showed the Pope the wound in his side and asked him for a cup to gather the fluid pouring out of the wound. The Pope gave Francis the cup and saw the fluid filling up to the cup to its brim. This event is celebrated in one of Giotto's famous frescoes in the Upper Basilica. Here in the Basilica of St. Francis in Assisi, we are blessed with several frescoes of St. Francis receiving the stigmata. Perhaps the most famous one is the fresco painted by Giotto in the Upper Basilica. The fresco dates from around 1300. In this image, Giotto depicts Francis on top of La Verna, receiving the imprint of the stigmata from the seraphim. In the bottom right-hand corner, a friar sits in witness to the event. The feast of the Stigmata of St. Francis is celebrated in the Franciscan liturgical calendar on the 17th of September. I hope that you enjoy this podcast and will join us again in the near future for another episode. God bless.